Welcome everyone. Just a reminder that the online learning session will be recorded, so please do keep your cameras and your sound off, and there will be time for questions at the end. But I just hand over now to Mark Davis from our fundraising team and thank them for putting on this session for forums today. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Cheers. Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. I'm really glad that you're attending today. So the overarching theme is fundraising tips and guidance for Para Forum. So my name is Mark Davis. I'm Director of Income Generation for Contact, an incredible charity which I care passionately about as a parent carer myself. So we've got quite a big remit. We cover all the different fundraising streams, but we're specifically going to focus on charitable grant giving trusts and foundations today, and we will be running further webinars covering different topics. So I'll just go through the kind of areas that we're going to cover today, and there'll be plenty of room for questions at the end. So do post things in the chat. You can either do it now as we go along as you think of them, or if you just wanted to wait to the end, we've got at least 20 minutes at the end for a Q&A session with myself and my colleagues. So today we're going to cover the whole kind of application cycle. So that includes the case for support, which is the really important part of fundraising, the research in terms of the prospects that you can go to, the whole application process, and also thanking, putting in, which is all vital to the whole application cycle. So today, Tallulah, who is our statutory and trusts fundraising manager. We've got John, who is our statutory and trust fundraising officer, and also Hannah, our fundraising assistant. And Hannah is helping with the slides and also monitoring the chat. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to hand over to start the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. So as you can see here, we put some mostly recognisable trusts, well-known ones such as the National Lottery Community Fund and Children in Need. But there are also smaller local community foundations like the Cumbria one pictured there, which we think would be a good starting point for you guys to go for because they're specifically set up for regional funding. But essentially a trust is a legal entity empowered to make grants for charitable purposes. So trustees are responsible for managing the property for the benefit of beneficiaries, and charities and other organisations can apply to them to get grants for their work. As Mark just said, we're going to be focusing on trust fundraising today, but we hope to plan in some corporate fundraising, for example, and maybe things like community fundraising in the future as well. So the application cycle is an annual one. Trust fundraising is quite long term, so it's something to think about when you're planning your fundraising. And it has four main stages. The case for support, which is where you lay out the need for your work. Research, to create a pipeline of opportunities and to know who you're going to go to throughout the year. The actual application, and then the thanking, which is really important, reporting back on what you've achieved with their funding and then asking for them to renew their support so that it could become an annual donation, hopefully. So the case for support is essentially telling your story about what your organisation does, why, and what work you actually deliver. So it's kind of the who, what, where, why, and how. So who is your organisation, your values, your mission? What do you actually do day to day? Where is it based? You know, is it in a local region, which is really important to a lot of trusts who are constricted by geographical area? Why is your work needed? So that's where you can include statistics about the sort of challenges currently faced by families. And how do you meet the need? What is the actual work you're doing and how much does it cost to deliver? Statistics that we use often is sources such as the Disabled Children's Partnership. Yes, we will be sharing the slides afterwards. And we just put a quote there from a report that we often refer to, just to show you kind of how to refer back to the source in your case for support. Obviously, it's really important to make sure you have the name and the year so that the funder can always check that. So statistics is a way to show that your application is based on evidence, and like I say, can be verified by the funder, who will do their due diligence on your application. So here we've listed a couple of other places to find statistics. These links should work when you get the slides afterwards, so you can click through. So as already mentioned, the DCP, our own research counting the costs, which you may already know about, the government statistics collected in the census, and also Action for Children has some good ones too. So the second stage is research. So the more research you do, the more likely you are to be successful. And the first step, I would say, is to look back at your own organization's records, because you may have made, approaches in the past, or you may have existing contacts that could be connected to trusts. And then to look externally, so to look for trusts in your local area, potentially, or even nationally, ones who fund work nationally, to find trusts whose objectives match with yours. So this is where you're looking at what is their funding criteria, and if you are eligible, if your organization is eligible for their funding, and what their rules are, because they will set their own rules about how you can apply and how you can approach them. The other thing that's really key is to look at who they previously funded, because that gives you lots of clues about size of grants, or if you're likely to be supported. The Charity Commission Register is the first starting point for looking for trusts, and has all of their legal information on it. So that's linked there, and you can search by local area. So that's really useful. And here are some other search functions that we've listed: Charity Excellence, the community foundations that I've mentioned, and the National Lottery Community Fund as well. Some trusts have websites and online portals. So this is an example here of the Garfield Weston Foundation, where you would need to sort of register and go through their process online. But a lot of trusts also are very old school and still do everything by post. So everything would be done by letter, and there may not even be any information about how to apply, just merely to send something in the post. This is an example of, once you found a trust on the Charity Commission, what it looks like. You can see there, hopefully it's not too small, on the left-hand side, the kind of the things the Charity Commission contains. And the accounts, if you can download them, is where to see who they previously funded. As already mentioned, that's a really key part of your research, to see if you could be their next potential charity. I'm going to hand over now to John for the next two stages.
Brilliant, thanks to Lula. So what does the process of actually applying look like? So we've done stage 1 and stage 2, we've got our case for support, and we found a trust that we want to apply for. Well, individual application processes will look very different depending on the funder. So it might be just a simple online form that you need to fill out, which you'll use your case for support to do, or it might be perhaps a more complex 3- or 4-stage process that might take place over a couple of months. Now, some trusts, as Toulouse kind of alluded to, will have websites. They'll have lots of information on their accounts, which might publish when their next meetings are, what format you need to put your funding proposal in for. They might well have an open application cycle, which means you can apply any time of the year. But others will have much more strict deadlines, and you're only able to apply during certain periods of time. But a real key point around this is that the decision times for trusts and foundations to make a decision about whether you're going to receive funding can take quite a long time. So the quickest I've ever got a decision from a trust was actually within less than a week. So I put in an application on a Wednesday and then got funding in on the following Tuesday. But equally, I've had times where I've put in an application in a January and not received the funding until the November. because some trusts will have a regular monthly meeting or quarterly meeting, others might only have one meeting a year. And it's important that you factor the decision turnaround time when you put an application in, because if you're putting in an application for a specific project, let's say you have some wellbeing days that you want to deliver with some families in the May, and the decision turnaround time is looking around 3 to 4 months, you're going to have wanted to apply back in kind of January, February time to ensure you have the funding to deliver that project. Because a lot of trusts, I actually don't know of any that do, will not fund retrospectively. And what we mean by that is they won't fund work that has already taken place. So they want the funding to be applied to work that is going to take place in the future. Just go to the next one for me, please, Hannah. So here's an example of what an online application form might look like. So this one is taken from the National Lottery, from Awards for All. And with this one, this is where you'd be using your case for support, which has got all the information about your projects, the cause, why you're doing what you're doing, and you then use that information to fill in the form. Now, you can see here some kind of examples of some questions that you might be asked, but they will ask for some quite specific information as well. So they may well ask, how many people do you expect to reach with this funding? Where are these people going to be based? You can see here, actually, in this one, they will ask a specific on the postcode that your work is going to be delivered on. So these are the sorts of information that you may well need to put into an application form. And it's good to have these in mind or in the kind of the back of your head if these sort of questions do come up. So I won't go for all of these, but these are the sorts of questions that you could potentially be asked as part of the application process. So majority of the time you will be asked the basics of what are the aims and objectives of your organisation. But again, you will be asked those specifics. How many beneficiaries will you reach? They may want to know what sort of disabilities will the children you'll be working with have. They might want to know their age groups and other kind of little details like that, because that then informs their decision making and whether your ask fits within their funding priorities. But it's important with this that whatever you say that you're going to do, and this links to stage 4, which we'll go on to, whatever you say you're going to do in your funding application, you are going to need to report back on. So if you say you're going to reach X, let's say you're going to reach 10 families with this project, you're going to want to set that target as a realistic target. Are you going to be able to reach 10 families? Because the trust is going to ask you to report back on, did you reach 10 families? And if not, why not? So as part of the application process as well, you may be asked for some additional documentation, and this is just part of a trust or foundation's due diligence. So you might well be asked for things like a set of financial accounts or records. They might ask for things like safeguarding policies, constitution documents, copies of bank statements. But the majority of the time, if you have a trust or foundation that is asking for this sort of information, they will provide guidance around it. And it's also worth of note that for some of you, it used to be the industry standard. So if some of you are registered charities, I know not everyone here is, but you would, as part of an application, just provide a set of accounts either in the post or as part of the application form. But majority of the time now, a trust or foundation can find that information online. So unless a trust specifically asks you to provide a copy of those kind of registered accounts or anything like that, there's no need to. But do make sure you follow their instructions. The other thing to mention with this as well is if you don't have a copy of a document that they've asked you to provide, I would get in touch with the trust, because it might be that they've called it a different name, or you have another document which covers what they're looking for. And so it's better to just have a conversation about it with the trust, because you may well have another policy which covers the sort of thing that they are looking for. So we now come to the final stage, and I know it seems very obvious, but it's really important, obviously, if you do receive a grant or a donation, to thank your donor. And this is both a form of stewardship. You know, it's amazing they're giving you money for what you're going to do, but it's also a formal requirement for a trust and foundation as well, that you acknowledge that donation in a formal way. So we recommend always send a formal letter to acknowledge that donation. So there's an example here of a trust that we've sent a thank you letter to. So in this one, you know, we've highlighted the amount that they've given, and then again, you're just highlighting the difference that their funding is going to make. So be sure to again highlight to the funder look, you're giving us this donation, this is the amazing work we're going to do, but also you can see there put at the bottom, it might be a bit small, but please accept this letter as a receipt for your records. So if they want something different, so some trusts might want you to provide a receipt in a different way, they might want you to fill in their own form, but they'll acknowledge that to you and they'll let you know. So this then brings us on to reporting. So similarly to the application process, reporting will look different depending on the funder. Some will have very specific reporting requirements where they might want you to give a quarterly report or a monthly report or perhaps a yearly report, and others won't ask you to provide any report at all. But we would recommend, if you do come across a trust that isn't asking for a report, always do send a report to them about what you've done, either at the end of the project or at least after 12 months of the fund, after when the funding's finished. So this is a chance for you to obviously highlight again to the funder, this is what we've been able to do with your work, this is the amazing difference we've made. And in that report, you might include case studies, you'll use stats and figures, some anecdotes to bring it to life to them again. But it's also an opportunity for you to actually renew your funding with them. So if after a year you've spent their money, you've done amazing work, you've then got a chance within this report to say, this is what we've been able to achieve with your funding. We'd now like to do this again. We'd now like to continue doing this work. Will you consider supporting us again? So at the end of that report, you can use that as an opportunity to renew their funding. Now, again, this will differ depending on the funder. So in some cases, it might not be appropriate to do that. They may well say, in order to get new funding, you'll need to fill in another online application form or go for a different process. But for trusts and foundations that don't provide kind of any guidance around it, use the report as an opportunity to renew the funding as well. And I'll pass over to Mark.
Brilliant, thank you, John. That was really helpful. Yeah, I think there's something in the chat around me not being very clear. I think I'm having a bit of difficulty with my reception, but hopefully you can hear me. So we're very, very happy to help. So if you wanted to get in touch, because I think the most important part of all fundraising is the case for support. So if you wanted to drop us an email, and we're also going to be running monthly drop-in sessions, which we can let you know more about, then do get in touch. You know, if you want any help, you want to send us any draft text that you're working on, and we can kind of help, or in that way. We can also help if you want to collaborate. That runs a number of programs, workshops and family activities, and throughout the country. So we also obviously run fledglings or e-commerce sites. So there's lots of different projects. You know, we're running a Python, a lending library with fledglings, which is very scalable for forums. So do get in touch, and we were very happy to help. In terms of, I know there was a question that Julie put on in terms of where to find the information. There is a slide, and they're a really good source of information, particularly trying to find more local trusts and foundations. But again, we subscribe to an online portal, so if you did need some help on some research, do get in touch and we can help find some prospects in the local nature of what you do lends itself to certain types of funders. So we're very happy to take questions.
Yes, we have a couple questions. I've seen one that says, do all trusts require a phone or face-to-face interview to discuss applications before making a decision on whether to fund you? So Tallulah, if you'd like to answer that one.
Yeah, sure. Most certainly not, I would say. I think it's actually quite rare for a trust to have that kind of process. It's quite common for the National Lottery to want to talk to you to discuss your project so that they can give you guidance. So it's always, when that is required, it's always in a supportive way. It's always to help you be successful rather than it being in any way intimidating. But yeah, no, most trusts are quite sort of faceless, I would say. And so often you don't really have any contact with them unless you are successful.
We do have another one that says they'd be keen to hear of other successful funding streams for PCFs little or large? So John, Lula, whoever wants to take that.
Well, actually, I think that might be one for Sarah, maybe to.
I couldn't quite hear the question. Can you repeat it?
So it was, they would be keen to hear of other successful funding streams for PCFs, little or large.
Well, certainly from experience, I know that a number of forums have gone to the lottery, either getting, I think it's up to £10,000 for a small grant from Awards for All, and some have gone for larger sort of 3, 4, even 5-year funding from the lottery. And there've been a number of forums who've successfully got 5-year funding from the lottery. Many years ago, I used to, in terms of trusts that like local groups and organisations, I vaguely, and John, Mark and John Tallulah, you'll be able to kind of chip in. From memory, places like Lloyd's TSB Trust, they used to like kind of
they're absolutely brilliant, and again very focused on local need and smaller organisations without doubt. And I definitely recommend local community foundations. That they're perfect.
Yeah.
It's also very important to factor in the actual legal status of the forum, because not many are registered charities, quite a lot of community interest. So it's also really important to check if you are eligible with your status. And we did do research on this before preparing for the webinar, and Awards for All, it's absolutely fine to be a CRC, and also that's the National Lottery scheme, and the majority of community foundations as well, and some trusted foundations. But it's well worth checking out. There's nothing worse than putting all the work in and then applying to something and not being eligible. So that's a really vital component.
Local trusts and supermarkets, so your local council for voluntary service or community council, they're called different things in different areas. So look up your local community development networks, and they will know who the local trusts are, and they're very keen to give sort of local groups like forums money. So definitely good ones to try. And supermarkets like giving to local groups, so they're also quite useful.
There's one last question that says, can KPIs be negotiated, or would that be a funder's discretion / decision? So whoever feels they can answer it best.
Shall I take it, or unless John, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think maybe we'll pitch in together from our own experience. So it's a really interesting question, because the answer is honestly, it probably really depends on the funder. So your KPI, your key performance indicators, within your application, you might well say something like, we're going to reach X amount of families, or we're going to deliver X hours of sessions. But funders will be aware that whilst you're then delivering that work, that stuff happens, there might be different circumstances, which means that you might not be able to deliver, or you've had to deliver in a different way. And that's part of the process. So the answer is, to an extent, yes, you can. You'd have to then discuss it with the funder and say, look, we plan to do this, but as a result, we can't do this now. So we're going to be delivering to these different people, or this instead. But I would say the important thing with that is to keep in contact with the funder. If there is something that's going to be changing, or you're not sure, just keep them up to date, because that way you'll keeping the communication going. And it's going to be a lot worse if you don't keep the communication going, and then at the end you say, oh yeah, we actually delivered the project completely differently to how we said we were going to do it. So the answer to that question is just communicate with your funder around it.
Yeah, that's just to echo what John said, the transparency is really important. I think with some funders, National Lottery are responsive, and quite often you can talk to someone, and sometimes they actually really like developing an application with you, and that's a really good idea. You can then talk about the delivery of the main update. In most cases, you do have to kind of set them in advance, and there won't be any dialogue. And as John said, the most important important thing is to check
Sorry.
in. You're sometimes you may have seen it on it, and sometimes.
Mark, you're just cutting in and out again.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I think it's my, I'm really sorry. I was just trying to give a practical example because COVID dramatically changed a number of our programs. So we had funding awarded for certain delivery that changed dramatically, you know, lots of things moving online and various other things. But the most important thing was telling the funder and agreeing it with them.
So I don't know if anyone else has any questions. I think we've covered the ones that were in the chat.
Hi, it's Julie here. I just put a couple of things in the chat, and I was just saying that in the London area there used to be Capital Radio, and a lot. I know it's probably changed names now, and I don't know what it is now. But I think that they used to fund lots of community-based projects, including ones that I used to run, and so they would be another. And there used to be called something called the Trust for London as well, and I don't know if they both still around. But also like local radio stations sometimes have appeals where they ask listeners to kind of raise money for certain charities or good causes, and sometimes they ask them to donate goods like toys for Christmas toy appeals or food hampers and things like that. And it's the same with local papers, so those are good people to like link into. And then also some people, you know, if you can find local businesses, you can actually kind of see if they'd be willing to support your work through their corporate responsibility programs as well. So I know a couple of the bigger forums in my areas are linked into local companies who have quite a lot of involvement with them. So they're just some other ideas as well.
Yeah, as mentioned, we hope to plan another session like this, but for corporate fundraising, which is
Sure.
kind of its own subject in itself.
Yes.
But definitely.
Are there any final questions? It seems very quiet. I think that the most interesting thing, I think, will be your drop-ins and the support that you can offer to forums. I think that's going to be, you know, I hope that will be really helpful for people, especially sharing you know, their proposals and oh, I can't remember what it's called now. Brain's gone. But anyway, I do hope
Case for support.
Thank you. Thank you. You can tell I'm not a professional fundraiser. Or if I was one, I'd be one with a very bad memory. So thank you for that. I know. I vaguely remember putting in cases for support years ago, and I always found that the really hardest thing to do. So I wish I'd had a team like you backing up what I was doing.
Oh.
So I'm sure that would be really useful.
Thanks, Sarah.
Have we prompted any further questions, or are we all ready to close? It's been a very quick run through. Okay, I think that is all the questions, but I just want to thank you all on behalf of the participation team. Thank you so much for putting this session together, and look forward to the next one. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody.
Thanks everyone.